All right, so we have around 20 minutes here. Let's get started right away. So thanks for joining our wonderful session in a wonderful day. And today I'm going to talk about DevOps and few other development tools. As you have seen in our previous topic, Praveen has did a detailed walkthrough of developer console, but we are not just limited to that. So the same forward-looking statement. So please do all your purchase decision based on currently available products. So certain products we are talking here might not be available or might not be unofficially supported by Salesforce. So please always do your purchase decision based on currently available product. Okay, so when we talk about DevOps or development process, we cannot skip the application lifecycle, right? So let's get started with that. But before we get into more detail, let's try to understand or brief what's safe to change in production, because so far we have not talked about sandbox. So that is a new word for few people. So in production, what is good to or what is safe to change? I would say anything which don't affect data. For example, if you create a new field or if you create a validation rule, that is definitely going to affect data or your other metadata elements. But if you are creating reports, dashboards, or report types, it's just the visualization side of it, right? So whatever data you are having, you are just querying it or seeing it in the table view or in your dashboard component view, or you can create email templates which is leveraging data like the merge tags, or you can create analytic snapshots which helps you to store all the historical values in a timeline manner, like yesterday what was the count of cases, open cases, and today what is the open cases count. So you can do the line chart like that. So anything which don't affect your data, it is good to do in production. For all other changes, for example, required fields, validation rules, those things can break code or test class, or even it will make your data as bad data if you don't have that value in the corresponding field, right? And if you create any workflow rule, which could cause a loop. For example, yesterday you have learned about the order of execution, right? So the workflow field update can invoke or can put the record again in the save process. Same thing for the process builder field updates or new record creation, like any DML operation. So uh, those things will cause trouble. So that is why it is very important to understand the whole application lifecycle and different stages of it. So this is the general application lifecycle management. The images I'm referring here is mostly available in Trailhead, and I have noticed a few people are asking about what is a good material beyond this webinar series. I would say to get started, you are learning in Salesforce, always get started in Trailhead. It is more tailored towards your need, like based on your profile or role, and what level of skill set you have and what kind of product interest you have. You can curate your trial mixes or trials, and you can learn on that. So always get started in trial. And most of the images I'm referring here is all also available in trial. So let's get started on this. So it's a cycle, right? So you have, there is a plan release, develop, test, build release, test release, and a release. So what we do in plan release, it's mostly the general life cycle of any application development. Like we do the requirement gathering here. So in development, we create or modify metadata in Sandbox or Scratch. So let's talk more about Sandbox in our later slides. And in test, we do the development testing or SIT, system integration testing. And we in the build release, we will collect all the components, like we package them and move it to other orgs for the QAT or UAT, mostly for the regression testing before we release it to the production. So in the final step, we will release the changes to production. So end consumers can start consuming whatever enhancements or improvements you have done to the system. So here, I have used two words which you might not familiar with. One is sandbox, another one is deployment. So let's get into more details in the later on text on that. So let me jump onto what is sandbox. So far, if you are not in any of the client instances of Salesforce, you might work only on developer orgs. But in real world, we have production, which is the real end consumer using org, and we have sandboxes. Basically, sandbox is creates copy of your production org. It is more like a playground or development ground where you do all the development, and you also use sandboxes for your testing purpose. So yeah, that is the main thing. And also we use sandboxes for training or onboarding power users who can add more business values and business scenario to our process. So we have four high level sandbox categories. Developer and developer pro sandbox just copies the metadata from production instance or whichever source organization we are referring to. Means we can copy a sandbox to another sandbox. So if you are creating a developer or developer pro sandbox, it copies just the metadata from production or the source instance. So here we have to understand what is metadata. All your code components, all your objects, fields, even your report dashboards, all of them are considered as metadata. What is data? It's all about the records you create in the system. So typically your rows in your database, right? So the developer and developer pro support sandbox only copies the metadata, but partial copy and full copy sandboxes helps us to copy the data as well as metadata. And one difference is like partial copy doesn't copy all the production copy data. It just creates a subset. You can have a sandbox template where you can apply what is the criteria and how many records you would like to copy to partial copy. The reason is like it has different storage type. For example, developer sandbox has, I believe it is 200 MB. Developer pro, it is about 1 GB, and partial copy is about 5 GB, and full copy is like equivalent to your production storage space, which is usually start 10 GB and more based on number of user license you have. And one more important consideration you have to have is like each sandbox has different refresh frequency. For example, two sandboxes you have here, you can refresh it with 1 day interval. Like I can create a sandbox today, after 24 hours I can refresh the sandbox if I want. But for partial copy, you have to wait at least 5 days, and for full copy at least 29 days. And based on the Salesforce edition customer uses, the number of sandboxes available varies. For example, enterprise org comes with one partial copy and few times 5 developer pro and I believe 100 developer sandbox. But the unlimited edition comes with one full copy sandbox. So if your enterprise customer wants to have a full sandbox, they have to do additional purchase from Salesforce. So these are some considerations around sandbox. And let's talk about sandbox strategy, right? So when how many sandboxes we typically have in a regular implementation? Again, this is the recommended for a minimal setup sandbox setup, I would say. But as the business complexity grows and as the org complexity grows and as multiple vendors involves, this grows drastically, I would say. So in any simple or a mid-size implementation, this is a typical sandbox strategy we follow. Like we have n number of development sandboxes. So based on the different team or feature requests or modules we are working, we will have our team to work on different developer sandboxes, and we will merge all the development sandbox code changes to SIT, system integration testing environment, before we promote to QAT. So this is where all the merge things happen, and this is where the first round of deployment happens for our QA testers to test. So our deployment testing will be happen here. This is where we compile our code, and this is where we move our code for our internal testing team to test. So all the smoke test and regression test happens here. And once we would like to engage our customers or power users to do the testing, we promote this to UAT, and all the power users will and business users will test the changes here. Once they approve, it will be deployed here. So if you think here, all the code changes will happen only here, and this is where the first merge happens. And all these instances, we don't do any code change at all. Here, by having the sample data and production copy data, we do the testing, and this is where the real end customer works or have their actual business data and business process executed. So we have some recommendations here for sure, because we should know when we should use what type of sandbox. For example, as I mentioned earlier, we recommend to use developer or developer pro sandbox for your development and SIT purpose, partial sandbox for your QAT, and full sandbox for UAT. It has its own reason, right? Because I was talking about the refresh frequency, data storage available on each instance. As a developer, you might need very limited set of data for your testing. But as a quality assurance user, I would like to test with more data, and I need more data to be tested. So definitely developer and developer pro sandbox might hit the data storage limit. So that is why we recommend to have QAT in partial sandbox. And for end business users, they might want their full data set to be there in the instance, so that they can work with the recent record, they can create new record, and if they want to apply any business rule with the historical or old record, they can do that. So that is why we recommend this sandbox structure in general. And we also highly recommend to refresh sandbox in particular time interval. So in any small to mid-sized project, we schedule sandbox refresh every month in general, at least on the QAT and UAT instance, because we try to match this instance as closer as production. So that is the last point I was talking here. So QAT and UAT should be as closer as to production. Developer sandbox, yeah, it again, it depends on the number of developers and the project code movement dependent. But I would say for QAT and UAT, it is good to get started with your fresh UAT and QAT sandbox for a specific release. Once the release is done, it could be 3 sprint or 6 sprint, but once it is done, it is a must to have a sandbox refresh on these two instances. And there are a few more recommendations I have based on our last 10 years or 11 years of Salesforce experience. Like, it is good to mask your data in a partial and full sandbox, because we are creating this data based on production data, right? So it is a sample set or a full copy of your production data. So you might not expose the same to your developmenting Cuba resource, or even for the power users. You might want to mask it. Salesforce recently launched a product called Sandbox Mask, but there are few open source, some app exchange products available there. Few of them are paid, but I recommend to mask the data as much as possible, and always disable the email deliverables in these two sandbox, because we copy the value from production. So if you are not masking it, the sandbox will have the real client's email address, and when you are testing any email notification or outbound kind of thing, you might send an actual email from your sandbox instance, that we should not do at any cost. And this is something we try to follow as much as possible, limit access to developers to these two environments, because as developers might not know the implication of accessing these data and the power of a full sandbox or partial sandbox. So it is good to give enough knowledge and give the guideline what you have, what you can do, what and what you should not do in these sandbox. Then onboard any developers. If you're not doing it, then you should not give access to your developers. And Sales, Salesforce DX as the recent DevOps process, as everyone might aware of. They have a concept of scratch org. So in it is really helpful for product development, for but for projects, yes, it is still helpful, but it is not a complete replacement to sandbox. But again, scratch org plays a major role in package dependent development, which we will see in next few slides. So typically, there are three different development models we follow in Salesforce. One is the chain set development, second one is org development, and third one is package development. When I say package development, this is not the app exchange product development. It is for project deliverables. You can create unlocked packages to move components from one instance to another instance. So I'm referring to that. So let's have a quick look into these modules first. Like change that model, say you do your development and testing in your dev sandboxes, and you release your build element to developer pro sandbox, and you test the full regression testing and business user testing in full sandbox and release it in production. So this is where we saw very detailed in few slides before. There are some downside of it. It doesn't have any standard version control, and you use change sets to components from one instance to another instance, and this is very quick and admin friendly. But if you look into the org development model, this is source code driven, and that is the very hot element for the Salesforce DX. And this is very developer friendly. You can track all your changes from day one, like since you are doing all the commits, right? And CLI is the backbone of it, and you can leverage Ant also or pipelines, and it is a great tool or element for CA and CD. So here, as you can see here, we do development in Sandbox, but we have a tightly coupled integration with the source code repository. And once the development is done, based on your commit and merge request, you will move changes to other development instance. Like here we have the SIT, and you do the testing here, and you do the full sandbox release here for the business user testing, and again you promote things to production for end user consumption. So even here you see, in these elements only we are doing code changes. Here we are just doing deployments, so there is no two-way communication. Everything is deployed using your source code repository. So the third one, which is the latest and greatest in Salesforce, this is package development model, which is basically unlock packages. So you can package all your logical components. For example, it could be based on your module or business division, or even it could be a collection of three different modules, and you can put it in one single package and maintain it. So it is similar to managing your packages, but again, it is also source code driven. So you can engage different teams in different packages. So it will be isolated, and this gives a high level scaling in agile development methodology, because one team can work on CRM customization, and other team can work on time of management, and everything is deployed as a different package. As you can see, the next team can work on a batch release. In the meanwhile, the another team can work on major release like 2.0. By considering time, let me quickly accelerate this. So typically what tools we use developer console, VS code, and Workbench. Mostly developer console, I think Praveen did a wonderful job of doing a deep dive in it. VS code is the latest and greatest, and again Salesforce fully supported IDE, where you can have Salesforce extensions and few other plugins to manage your actions. And we use Workbench, which is more admin friendly or business user friendly of managing things. So let's quickly see what other tools do here. So VS Code is, again, it is a fully Salesforce supported extension, and it supports org development and package development model. CLI is the backbone. You have to install the CLI extension in your VS Code, and we recommend these additional extensions to have a wonderful and powerful DevOps process in place. So Apex PMD is really helpful to do your static source code analyzer. So it will enforce all the best practices, and it will notify if you have any anti-patterns in the code, which Simon was talking about. And the package XML generator helps to package components and retrieve or deploy to the org. And Git lens is for your better source code management, and XML is to format your package XML in a prettier way, and prettier helps to see your code in more friendly way, especially for CSS and kind of elements. So this is, again, when we do the development using CI or Scratch, or even for VS Code approach, this is the typical approach we follow. Like we create a number of Scratch orgs to do the development, and even for continuous integration, we do Scratch org to test the changes, and then the rest of the flow follows the same thing. Like from your version control, you deploy to different instances for your QAT, UAT, and for production instance. So this is the modern way of doing things. So don't pull any changes from org on these steps, but here you just deploy changes and ensure quality in your development deliverables. So Workbench, as I mentioned, it is more admin and BA friendly tool, and it has UI to select fields while querying, and you can also leverage REST API and metadata API for your deployments or querying and testing any changes. I think Mahendran briefly showed that. And this is not for development. This is for retrieving any data in view, and even you can do some data manipulation, like you can query record and update, like what Praveen has shown in his developer console demo. But one good thing, one must thing you have to know on this is, like, this is not officially Salesforce supported product, but we use it minimally day in and day out. One last thing, sorry guys, I'm running beyond the schedule time, but I just have 3 slides, so I will make it short and complete it in another 3 to 5 minutes. So what is deployment? Basically, it is to deploy changes between orgs. So it could be from sandbox to production, or production to sandbox, or sandbox to sandbox. And again, you do outbound and inbound. Basically, you create component from one instance, which is outbound, and you accept and deploy changes in another environment, it is inbound. And tools we use for deployment. So based on your development model, we can use change sets, or Salesforce extension for VS Code, which is the CLI command line, and ant migration tool. Like this is equivalent to the pipelines you do. Ant and Jenkins you can do, or you can use the GitHub kind of pipelines tools too. And you can also metadata API, which is leveraging SOAP API. And the last slide, but very, very important slide, which is deployment consideration. So before you initiate any deployment process, you have to run all tests in your source org to make sure there is no test class failure, to avoid breakages or surprises, I would say. If you are planning some deployment tomorrow, do this step today itself, so that no need to wake up your night or 12 hours for your deployment. This is the very first step of your deployment preparation. And also always make sure your test class coverage is over and beyond 75%. We highly recommend to maintain it at least 85%. If it is 90 and above, which is really great, but we try to keep this always above 85%, because we might do some quick fixes which could break or reduce the test class percentage drastically sometimes. So we always recommend to maintain 85 and above. And always take the target or code backup. For example, if something went wrong, you should have something to revert your changes. So in version code control, version control system deployment, this is covered because you have the previous version code for sure. But in change set, it is always important to take a backup before you initialize any deployment. And you can deploy with profiles and permission sets. So whichever components you are adding to the change set, no need to go and do the profile permissions again, which is again very time consuming in larger organizations. This info or this implies something, right? So when you are doing your QAT or UAT, if you are doing your profile permission there in those are, you can include your profiles and permission sets in your deployment. So that will reduce a lot of time in your deployment and post deployment configuration work. So the last one is like, again, post deployment configuration. This thing, if you are missing it, you have to do it manually. If not, it is auto applied. And configuration data is more like changing your custom label, custom metadata, custom setting, any other application variables. Even if you have that in your custom object, you have to make sure you complete those steps. And sometimes you have to enable the assignments for record type assignment or lightning page assignment per profile, or creating audience in communities like that. So there will be some manual configurations you have to do after deployment. Make sure you have those lists and done those things in sandboxes first before you do it in real instance, so that you will not miss any step. And one good point I want to emphasize is these processes not only for developers. This is for admins too. In the very first slide I was talking, creating fields, creating workflow rules, creating validation rules will break some things. So that means you have to follow the same protocols which we are dictating for our developers. Say, create your validation rule from the developer edition, or sorry, from the development sandbox, promote it to your SIT, promote it to QA, do your testing, promote it to UAT, bring your business users to test those changes, even though it is a minor change in your validation rule, or you make a required field. Do those testing, make sure all the test classes are running fine, then deploy it to production. That will make your life easy, your business life users life easy, and I would say 200% it will make your developers and your IT managers life easy. So that's pretty much everything from my end. Again, our my friends make my presentation a little rush, but I'm happy you get we got everything, and you get essence of everything. Please, you invest your time in learning in Trailhead, and thank you again. Thank you for joining with us in this wonderful day. Over to you, Shekhar or Sudesh.